Gopi Chanda Ballabha Girivadakari Gopi Chanda Ballabha Girivadakari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Vanacharya Yamuna Tira Vanacharya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Chanda Ballabha Girivadakari Gopi Chanda Ballabha Girivadakari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanacharya Yamuna Tira Vanacharya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Vishnu Vishnupada Paramahamsa Pari Vrajakacharya Astu Tarasata Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Abhay Charanada Bindu Prabhupada Ki ISKCON BBD Founder-Acharya save the whole world Śrīla Prabhupada Ki Jai Vishnu Vishnupada Paramahamsa Pari Vrajakacharya Astu Tarasata Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Premsagaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sivsadi Gaura Bhaktivedanta Ki Shri Radha Krishna Govardhana Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Ki Brajbhumi Shivindavadama Ki Navdeep Mayapur Dhamma Ki Pushtam Chatra Jagannath Puri Dhamma Ki Ganga Mai Ki Jamuna Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Samaveta Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai Nitai Go Premanandi Oh glorious assemblies Oh glorious assemblies Oh glorious assemblies Oh glorious Lotus feet of Shri Guru and Shri Garanga All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Vishnu Padaya. Krishna Sabhavaya Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. Namo Prabhupada. Krishna Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Bhajani. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Chatria aprajasya vai bratu. Chatria prajasya vai bratu. Almost sounds the same as brother, doesn't it? Bratur means brother. Bratur. Chatria prajasya vai bratur. Matrokto badarayana. Matrokto badarayana. Matrokto badarayana. Chatria prajasya vai bratur. Matrokto badarayana. Dhritarashtan cha pandum cha. Dhritarashtan cha pandum cha. Dhritarashtan cha pandum cha. Vidurang chapi ajijanat. Viduran chapyajijanat. Vidurang chapyajijanat. Dratarastrang chapandang cha. Vidurang chapyajijanat. Chatria prajasya vai bratur. Matrokto badarayana. Dhritarashtrang cha pandung cha. Vidurang chapyajijanat. Chatria prajasya vai bratur. Matrokto badarayana. Dhritarashtrang cha pandung cha. Vidurang chapyajijanat. Vidurang chapyajijanat. Vaishnavis. Matrokto badarayana. Dhritarashtrang cha pandung cha. Vidurang chapyajijanat. Vidurang chapya jijanat Chetripaga shivai paratu Matrakto badarayana Atrasam chapandungcha Vidurang chapya jijanat Chetre in the wives and maidservant. In the wives and maidservant. Aprajasya of Vichitravirya, who had no progeny. Vai, indeed, Bratu of the brother. Matra Ukta, being ordered by the mother. Badarayana, Vedavyas. Dhritarashtra, a son named Dhritarashtra. Cha, and Pandum, a son named Pandu. Cha, also. Viduram, a son named Vidura. Cha, also. Api, indeed. Ajijanat, begot. Translation. Badarayana, Sri Vyasadeva, following the order of his mother, Satyavati, begot 3 sons, 2 by the womb of Ambika and Ambalika, the two wives of his brother Vichitravirya, and the third by Vichitravirya's maidservant. These sons were Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura. Purport. Vichitravirya died of tuberculosis, and his wives Ambika and Ambalika had no issue. Therefore, after Vichitravirya's death, and his mother, Satyavati, who was also the mother of Vyasadeva, asked Vyasadeva to beget children through the wives of Vichitravirya. In those days, the brother of the husband could beget children through the womb of his sister-in-law. This was known as Devarena Sutotpati. If the husband was somehow unable to beget children, his brother could do so through the womb of his sister-in-law. This Devarena Sutotpati and the sacrifices of Ashvamedha and Gomedha are forbidden in the age of Kali. Ashvamedham gavalambam sanyasam palapaitrikam Devarena Sutotpatim kalo pancha vivajayat. In this age of Kali, 5 acts are forbidden: the offering of a horse in sacrifice, the offering of a cow in sacrifice, the acceptance of the order of sannyas, the offering of oblations of flesh to the forefathers, and a man's begetting children in his brother's wife. Brahma Vaivata Purana. So this is continuing the description of the dynasty, and there's 2 more chapters in this canto. The next one is describing again, I think it's Yayati's descendants, and then the one after is describing, the dynasty where Krishna appears. So describing the Yadu dynasty, and it's showing the interconnectivity, because if you read all these connections, and you'll see how during Krishna's pastimes, many of the interactions he had, there was some sort of relationship there, just like Shishupal was a relative of Krishna, but he killed him because of various promises and curses and things like that. But you'll see how the interconnectivity of all these different things. Here, we see this discussion is again coming up. It was touched on yesterday, but is again coming up about how Vichitravirya, who was the brother of Chitrangara, the two children of Shantanu and Satyavati, how he had no issue. And so this because with the Kshatriyas, very much driven by duty, and one of the prominent duties of the Kshatriya was to ensure that the dynasty was maintained. In some ways it's similar to what the modern politicians are doing. The modern politicians want to ensure that they maintain their position. But that's just about sense gratification. That's just about them staying in power, because there's a certain amount of satisfaction that comes from power, a certain amount of enjoyment that comes from being in a powerful position. And people become intoxicated by that. At least people of lower caliber become intoxicated by that. But with these Kshatriyas, it's a very different concept, in that they want to ensure that the dynasty or the bloodline is maintained, because the duty or the role of the Kshatriya in society is to ensure that people are properly guided in life, so that ultimately they can come to the point of God realization. And they take this duty very seriously. And duty, it basically it means, we follow the order of superiors, we follow the order of scriptures. It means that we're following authority. Whereas you'll see in the modern age, essentially every person is an authority unto themselves, meaning they don't want to follow anyone unless they absolutely have to. You'll see, with people when it comes to following the law, they'll only follow the law, if they can get away with not following the law of the land, they will. If there's some threat of going to jail, then they'll follow it. But otherwise not. They'll always, just do what they want to do. But we see with persons of higher breeding or higher caliber, is they will follow their duty. And this is what's happening here, because Vichitravirya, he died of excess, and then his wives Ambika and Ambalika had no issue. So then Satyavati, even though she was not coming in this royal line, but because she married into the line, and she came from, basically quite a good background. I mean, she was the daughter of Parashara. She came from quite a good background. She also, and she married into this family, she took on the duty of being the mother of the family, even though her husband had died. And when the husband had died, there was no issue. She was very much concerned about her duty, which was to ensure that the dynasty continued. Because each Varna and ashram has a particular duty. So the duty of the Kshatriya is to rule the country and to ensure that people are acting in a way that is religious, but also helping them to come to ultimately to a point of God consciousness. That it's their duty to ensure that people are following the principles of Varna and Ashrama. And so Satyavati took this very seriously. And so, because grandfather Bhishma was also there, and he was like the grandsire of the whole Kuru dynasty. And she discussed the matter with him. Okay, what are we going to do now that my son has died, and his two wives are without issue? Something has to be done. And first off, she said to Bhishma, you should impregnate them, because you're a great personality, and you're also coming in this bloodline, so this would be very good if you impregnate them, because it means the dynasty will continue and the bloodline will remain pure. Bhishma refused. He said, no, I have taken a vow. I cannot do this. I've taken a vow of lifelong brahmacharya, and he took this very seriously. And he said, but the scriptures indicate that a great personality such as a sage could also impregnate them, and this would also enrich the bloodline. And at that point, she reflected that actually, and explained to Bhishma, she'd never told it to anyone before. It was just something she kept secret. That actually, when I was younger, I was approached by Parashara Muni. He impregnated me, and as a result, Vyasadeva was born. And Bhishma was very, very familiar with Vyasadeva, because Vyasadeva would frequent the the palace in Hastinapur and things like that. And so Bhishma was quite familiar with him, and he offered respects just to hear the name of Vyasadeva. He offered his respects straight away because he revered Vyasadeva. And then, so Satyavati called for Vyasadeva immediately. And he came, he appeared there, mystically appeared in the palace. And so Satyavati explained to him the situation. And how there was no heir to the throne. And this was the real issue for her here. She wasn't so much worried about whether her children her daughters-in-law would have children or anything like that. The main concern was to have a suitable heir to the throne. And this was a big concern, because it would mean, just like we see in the Bhagavad Gita, where, in the end of the first chapter, where Krishna is encouraging Arjuna to engage in warfare, but then Arjuna's concern is like, but if all the men in the family are killed, how will the dynasty continue? And without the dynasty, without an appropriate ruler, then what will happen is that all the women will be cast into degradation. It means that Varna-Shankara will be born. So this is a great duty of the chatria, is to rule and to see that people are ruled religiously. Not just rule so they can get money or so they can have power or whatever, but to rule, to see that people live their lives religiously. Because if people don't live their lives religiously, and this is being identified by Arjuna in the first chapter, if people don't follow dharma, then everything goes to hell. And this is what's happening now in our modern society, is that there is no concept of dharma, or whatever concepts they may have of religion is just driven by mental speculation. And therefore, there is no real concept of what is the duty of the human form of life. This is clearly pointed out by Vyasadeva in the Vedanta Sutra, at the beginning of the Vedanta Sutra. He says, Tato Brahma Jigyasa. Now that you have the human form of life, your duty is to inquire into the nature of Brahman. We should understand the self, we should understand the super self, we should understand nature. We should understand these three things and how they interact together, and how I should be interacting with these things. Not that this material nature is here for my enjoyment. This is the bewildered concept of people in this material world, that this whole material world is here simply for my enjoyment. And this is why we see society is so messed up, because they have a wrong concept of what life is for. And as long as we function with these wrong concepts, then we'll be bewildered as to the outcome of what the goal of life is. But also, we will be consumed by so many miseries, because we're not understanding how things function. We're not understanding how we're actually supposed to happily execute our lives, simply because we don't understand how it's meant to function. It's just like if you buy some technological device. Just like someone bought me a phone when I was in the US recently, and I haven't had a chance to download the manual, read it, because I still don't know what all the buttons do. I know the on-off button, I know the volume button, and that's it. The other buttons I don't know. So it's just like that, like this world has a user manual, believe it or not. It's called the scriptures. When we study the scriptures, we can understand how we should function in this world, what our duty is, what the human form of life is meant for, what the different varnas, what they're meant to do. Modern society, they think it's all one, that everyone's meant to do the same thing. We should eat, drink, be merry. That's it. That's what the purpose of life is, Or in Australia, they have this concept of, you go to the footy, you drink beer, you eat meat pies. That's the concept of how you have a happy life. I remember years ago in Queensland, they had this ad idyllic setting down by the Brisbane River, the sun setting, there's a barbecue, attractive women, attractive young men, attractive young women, attractive young men, and they're all drinking 4X. The implication there, and there was some sort of dialogue was going on over the top of it, but the implication they were giving was that if you don't drink beer, if you don't smoke cigarettes, you're not a Queenslander, therefore you don't belong here. And that's the way they portray it. It's like you have to do these things in order to be, accepted in this society. But actually, their whole concept is wrong. And we see that people, bewildered by this advertising, they follow these ideas, and what does it lead to? It leads to them becoming distressed because they don't understand. It's the blind leading the blind. And what happens when a blind person leads a blind person? They miss the right path, they fall into a ditch. I remember having a practical experience of that. We were staying at a temple in Russia somewhere, I think. And there was a big hole next to the temple. And it wasn't really sort of, there's no barrier around it or anything like that. There's just a little bit of plastic tape. And I can't remember the detail of it, but I seem to remember at night, some night, that someone had actually fallen into it because there was no, they couldn't see it, but there was no barrier to stop them. So it's this whole thing. If you don't have the vision, if you can't see, then you're going to actually have an accident. You're going to, as I say, you miss the right path and fall into the ditch. And this is what's happening in this society, is because this society is blind and the leaders are blind. I don't know if anyone took any notice of the last election, but if you listen to the leaders of the various parties, what were they promising? Better sense gratification. I'll put more money in your paycheck. I'll lower the cost of living. All these types of promises. Has any of this manifested? There was one party as before, there's a different party in now. Has any of this manifested? Is there any difference between the previous party and this party? Zero. It makes no difference who's in power. You're still going to suffer because the leaders have no idea what their duty is. They're only doing it for themselves. They're only doing it because they want power, they want money, they want distinction, profit, adoration. That's what's driving every living entity in this material world. And as long as we have persons like that guiding us, we'll experience misery because they don't understand how to get freed from the suffering of birth, death, old age, and disease. And that's why, to understand what our duty is, we need to study the scriptures. We need to follow authorities that follow the scriptures, because then they will educate us on what is duty. The scriptures educate us on what is the duty. Now you have the human form of life. Inquire about Brahman. That's what the scriptures are telling us. It says, there's another statement, and it says, Hare nirbhaya maitara samanyat ete. guide people in spiritual life. Therefore, when there's no chatria, when there's no heir to the throne, when there's no one to lead the kingdom, I mean, Bhishma was there and he was doing it just out of duty because it had to be done, but he had taken a vow that he would not do that. He'd taken a vow, he promised Satyavati's father that Satyavati's children would be the emperors, and their descendants. So her children were Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. They passed on. So the legitimate wives were Ambika and Ambalika. And so he was ensuring that he carried out his duty. So then Vyasadeva came. And it's kind of interesting because when Satyavati told Ambika and Ambalika that, oh, I have another son, he is going to come and he will impregnate you, they're thinking Bhishma Dev. They're thinking like, powerful warrior, things like that. And so when Ambika was the first one, when Ambika saw Vyasadeva, because Vyasadeva, he's an ascetic, he's just engaged in penance and austerities. And so when she saw Vyasadeva, she freaked out and she closed her eyes tightly and just, it was like the whole time, like this, And then so as a result, the child that was born was blind. And then when Ambalika, when she saw Vyasadeva, she went white with fear. So then the child that was born, Pandu means the white one. So he was, because she was white with fear. And then finally, Ambalika agreed to again, I think it was Ambalika agreed to again unite with Vyasadeva, but she sent a maidservant instead. And maidservant, I mentioned this yesterday, how the maidservant served Vyasadeva very wonderfully. And then from that union, Vidura was born. And we see that Vidura was a great personality. And actually, it's kind of interesting that the way all these stories, there's so much, as I mentioned yesterday, everything here has a backstory. Because Vidura was actually Yamaraj, due to the curse of, what's his name? He's got a few different names. Yeah, due to the curse of some Muni. But there's so many amazing stories going on here. So the point here, and it's kind of interesting how even with these queens, Ambika and Ambalika, how they follow their duty, even though their husband has died. And no doubt there's because of loss, there's an element of grief is going on. You still, because they have a duty, they put this above their personal needs. And there's a really interesting story in the first canto where Krishna is leaving for Hastinapur. And all the ladies in the palace, they hear about Krishna departing, they start to cry. And then Yudhishthira says, no, this is inauspicious, you shouldn't cry. You should just, essentially he's encouraging them to be philosophical about it. But then I was just reflecting on this morning, it's not easy to be philosophical when we lose someone or lose something. It's not easy. But the scriptures encourage us to do that. We see it in so many places, how people suffer loss. And just like I was reading in the 7th canto the other day, after the death of Hiranyaksha. It's a really amazing story. It's like all the ladies of the palace are grieving, and Hiranyakashipu, get this, Hiranyakashipu, he comes, and he's preaching Bhagavat philosophy to them. Which is just amazing, because he's telling them, it's all going on by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yet he wants to kill the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I mean, it's like, figure that one out, It's like, but still we see how people become affected by grief, yet we see here with the higher castes, when duty is there, they put the duty before their personal grieving. So then it makes me wonder how they deal with that. And it's something, like we all experience loss. I don't think any of us haven't been through some element of loss. I mean, maybe some of the children haven't had so much loss, but as we go through life, we experience loss. And it seems to me that part of our evolution in spiritual life, we can understand where we're situated by how we deal with loss. Some people just become overwhelmed with lamentation. They practically stop being able to function. And this is in one sense, is not particularly helpful or particularly useful, but it's how people process. Other people tend to internalize it. And even that, I question, is that so healthy? Because we need to be able to move past grief. We see a lot of people developing, really nasty diseases as a result of emotions they haven't been able to process and move through. So I think, we need to be able to deal with these things in a natural, holistic way. And the best, at least in my experience, the best way that I've found to deal with it is to try to absorb myself in Scripture, try to understand what's happening. It's just some reflections on it. I'm not claiming to fully understand these things or to be able to process these things fully, but I just see, how I've dealt with loss over the years, and I see how others deal with loss over the years. And to me, becoming immersed in lamentation, it doesn't seem to be very productive. Not in the material sense, I'm thinking in terms of my personal evolution. Not productive making dollars and cents and things like that, but productive in terms of my evolution as a devotee. Because when we get involved in lamentation, generally is what is happening is we're becoming immersed in the bodily concept of life. And the process of bhakti is there to help us to overcome the bodily concept of life. So if we're lamenting because of the loss of a body, and I get this. It's not easy. It's not easy to move beyond that. But it seems like the more activities we get involved in that sort of perpetuate this bodily concept of life, it's going to make it more difficult for us to progress spiritually. And just a few reflections on that. My wife and I were having a conversation about this yesterday, and just looking at how people deal with loss. And it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing for sure. And it's easy to to intellectualize it, but it doesn't mean you've actually been able to process it. And I sort of question my own capacity when I experience grief is, am I simply intellectualizing it, or am I actually understanding, in terms of the body and the self? So, yeah. Any comments or questions at all? Yes? Sorry?
Even after getting the disappointment after enjoying for many lifetimes, still the conditioned soul goes after the same sense of joy.
Yeah.
So why is that?
Maya. It's the influence of Maya. Because it's just like, Prabhupada makes an interesting point about sex life. And he talks about how there's a coating of Maya on the genitals of the male and the female. So that even though for a woman the experience of childbirth is extraordinarily painful. I mean, I've witnessed childbirth. I know what it's like for the woman. I mean, not for me, but for the woman. That what they're going through is quite intense. And seeing that, I was thinking to myself, I would never want to go through that because it's an intense experience. Yet, due to this coating of Maya that is there, they forget. So because of the influence of Maya, we forget. Because we have this desire to enjoy. So as long as we have the desire to enjoy or to exploit the material nature, we become controlled by the material nature. So the only way to overcome that is to take shelter of Krishna's lotus feet. And there's a really nice verse in the 10th canto, and it uses the word plavam, and it's kind of comparing Krishna's lotus feet to a boat. Yeah? And so the boat, it's just like, and it compares the material world, this is samashutiye padapalava plavam. So it compares the material world to like a vast ocean. And I was making this point last week when I gave class, was you cannot swim across an ocean. You know, try to swim from here to Hawaii. It's just no way. It's just not possible for someone with this type of body to do that. But if we take shelter of a boat, we can do that. So the only way we can cross over this difficult material ocean is to take shelter of the lotus feet, the boat of the lotus feet of Krishna, or the boat of the lotus feet of a great spiritual personality. Because as long as we're here and as long as we're trying to enjoy the material nature, we suffer so much. And that's just the reality. You just have to look around you and you see we suffer. You know, we're suffering, everyone else is suffering in so many different ways. But because we're trying to control, because we're trying to exploit, because we're trying to enjoy the material nature, we are controlled by the material nature. We're thinking we're controlled, but actually we are controlled. We're thinking, I'm exploiting, I'm enjoying, I'm doing this. But no, that's not what's happening. You're completely dominated. We get swept up in it, and we just get so bewildered by it, we don't actually see the reality. And as long as we try to enjoy the material nature, as long as we try to exploit the resources of the material world, we are in illusion. We cannot see. There's a statement in the scripture that says, Pashyanapi na pashyati. Even though seeing, they do not see. That inevitable death is there. That so many people, every day, so many people go into the abode of death, yet we're convinced, I'm not going to die. Yeah? And even though, like I'm almost 70 years old now, when I think about death, but still I act like I'm not going to die. So, we can have some moments of introspection, but until we actually give up the endeavor to try to enjoy this material world, and until we take serious shelter of Krishna's lotus feet, it's going to keep happening. So it's the simple solution. Just take shelter of Krishna's lotus feet. But it's like one time Prabhupada, he was saying this process of Krishna consciousness is so simple. It is simply chanting, dancing, and taking prasad. But still we cannot do. It's such a simple process, but because of our attachment to enjoying material nature, we struggle with that. We struggle to do it. But don't give up trying. Anything else? Yes, Moji. Yeah.
Yes, ideally, like the path of bhakti and the scriptures show us how that there is a higher purpose, and we need to, in one sense, not focus on our body needs. But then, don't you feel
Yeah.
Before you can even get to the point of the ideal way or the personal Bhakti teaches us.
Yeah.
So isn't that something that in one sense should be encouraged? Because otherwise we could actually be fooling ourselves in thinking that we're healing or we can surpass these needs.
Yeah.
But actually we can't, we're actually just negating them.
Wait, what?
We're negating them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what I was talking about with intellectualizing these types of loss and grief and things like that. I think we can over-intellectualize these things and actually lose our way and not really understand what's going on for us. And, like trying to artificially suppress things, trying to be artificial when we're dealing with these things is not going to help us spiritually, because we'll become caught up in, and lost in some kind of a material experience or material emotion and not really understand what's happening, and not really understanding my ability or inability to deal with things. So I agree, we need to be very, very open with ourselves. And, an important part of our progress in spiritual life is introspection. Like, this year I started to keep a diary. It's something I've been meaning to do for years, but, it's just the diary is about my conversation with myself and exploring these types of things. And when things happen to me or when I have conversations with people that affect me, and looking at how I process things. I mean, I definitely have a tendency to intellectualize things, but that's just who I am, and I need to sort of look at that carefully and see, is that just my way of? Because see, one thing I experienced when I was younger is I had quite a few like physically traumatic things happen to me. I was in car accidents and bike accidents and stuff like that. The body got smashed up really badly, and the body just sort of shut down and just blocked it off. That was the way the body dealt with the pain. At one level, that seems to work, but when we're dealing with emotional pain, and as the point I was making before, when we're dealing with heavy emotions, we can't just block it out. We can't just shut off, because it's still there, it's still residing within the body, and it can create disease. There's lots of nasty like cancers and things like this, which come because people don't deal with things like that, or they just try to shut it down or push it down. So we have to. I think this is the point of being a healthy spiritualist, is you're able to deal with these things internally. For some people, the way they deal with things is they talk with their friends. That's fine, if that's what works for you. Other people are going to start looking at the scriptures, studying the scriptures, trying to reflect on what's, we're all going to deal with it differently. But ultimately, we have to get to the point of trying to deal with things in a way. This is just my reflection on it. It's not like I'm not stating from scriptures. We have to deal with things in a way which leads us to Krishna, not leads us to increasing our bodily identification. And if we're just lamenting because, I don't know, it's difficult because, when you're talking about stuff like this, you run the risk of hurting people's feelings, and I certainly don't want to do that sort of stuff. But we have to, somehow or other, whatever happens to us in our life, we need to use that as an impetus to get closer to Krishna, not deepen our attachment to the body. And so, in everything we do, when things are going good, when life is good, as they say, what's that an impetus for? Is that an impetus for further sense gratification, or is that an impetus to surrender to Krishna? When things are going bad, is that an impetus for further, like you look at materialists, when things go bad, what do? They drink. They take shelter of intoxication because they can blot it out. But that's such a negative way of dealing with it. No, we whatever happens to us in our life, we should use that as an impetus to bring us closer to Krishna. And, take shelter of Krishna. Krishna, help me to process this. Krishna, help me to understand this. Whatever goes on in life. Because we can't bottle this stuff up. Because we see, like sometimes people, they bottle all these things up inside of them, and at some point there's an explosion in one way or another. So we can't bottle all these things up inside, but again, we need to learn how to process these things in a way that is spiritually nourishing for us. And that's going to be different for everyone, because we're all different. So, I don't know if I've really answered your question. Because loss is difficult because of our attachments. But, we can learn how to deal with it. We have the capacity to deal with these things. But only when we take shelter of Krishna will this capacity become apparent. Because in and of ourselves, it's very difficult to deal with. I lost my mother, I lost my father, so many things. And you just have to learn how to deal with it. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivedanta ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol.